You're listening to Short History Shorts audio, where history speaks louder than images. The story of Rome's expansion into Hispania is one of the most brutal, protracted and determined military campaigns in the history of the Republic. Stretching across nearly 2 centuries, this was not a war of a single campaign or decisive battle, but a grinding, relentless struggle against fiercely independent peoples who valued their freedom more than their lives. Hispania, a name given by the Romans to the Iberian Peninsula, was a land of mountains, deep river valleys and rugged coasts. It was inhabited by a mosaic of peoples: the Iberians along the eastern and southern coasts, the Celtiberians, a fusion of Iberian and Celtic cultures in the central highlands, the Lusitanians in the west, the Cantabrians and Astures in the mountainous north, and various other tribes and confederations. Each had their own distinct customs, languages, and political systems, but they shared one common trait: an unwillingness to submit to foreign domination. Rome's first contact with Hispania came not through direct conquest, but via the Second Punic War, when the Carthaginians under Hamilcar Barca, Hasdrubal, and later Hannibal used the peninsula as both a base for expansion and a source of silver and manpower. The Barcid family effectively carved out a Carthaginian empire in Iberia after the First Punic War, both to replace Sicily as a revenue source and to fund their growing ambitions. Hannibal's recruitment of Iberian warriors, his establishment of military colonies, and his marriage into local elites cemented Carthaginian influence. The Roman Senate viewed this growing power with suspicion, especially when Hannibal besieged Saguntum, a city allied to Rome. Hannibal's attack on Saguntum in 219 BC was the spark that ignited the Second Punic War. When war broke out, Rome realized that to defeat Carthage, it would have to cut off its base in Hispania. The Scipio brothers, Gnaeus and Publius Cornelius Scipio, were sent to the peninsula to wrest control from the Carthaginians. Their campaigns, beginning in 218 BC, were a blend of diplomacy and warfare, gaining the support of some Iberian tribes while fighting others. Yet the rugged terrain and the guerrilla tactics of local warriors made every advance costly. Both brothers would ultimately perish in Hispania, victims of ambushes by forces loyal to Carthage, but their sacrifices laid the groundwork for Rome's eventual success. It was Publius Cornelius Scipio, later known as Scipio Africanus, who decisively turned the tide. In 209 BC, he captured the vital Carthaginian stronghold of New Carthage, modern Cartagena, in a brilliantly executed surprise attack, securing Carthaginian silver mines and a strategic harbour. By 206 BC, after the Battle of Ilipa, Carthaginian power in Hispania was broken, and Rome assumed control of large parts of the peninsula. But the Carthaginians' departure did not mean Roman peace. The Iberian tribes had not fought to replace one foreign master with another. Almost immediately, uprisings broke out against the Roman occupiers. Rome divided its holdings into 2 provinces, Hispania Sateria and Hispania Ulteria. But these were administrative in name only. In reality, Rome's governors were military commanders constantly engaged in suppressing rebellions. The Lusitanians in the west, under leaders like Punicus and Caesarus, proved especially dangerous, launching devastating raids into Roman-held territory. In the mid-2nd century BC, the Lusitanian resistance crystallized under the leadership of Viriathus, a man who rose from humble shepherd to guerrilla warlord. Viriathus understood the terrain and the hit-and-run tactics needed to harass the slow-moving, heavily armoured Roman legions. His forces avoided pitched battles, instead ambushing supply lines, striking at isolated detachments, and melting back into the mountains. Time and again he humiliated Roman commanders, forcing treaties on terms favourable to the Lusitanians. His success was such that the Senate resorted to treachery, bribing some of his supposed allies to assassinate him in 139 BC. Even after his death, Lusitanian resistance lingered, though it lost its unifying figure. To the northeast, the Celtiberians waged their own wars against Rome. The First Celtiberian War, 181-179 BC, and Second Celtiberian War, 154–151 BC saw fierce battles such as the Siege of Numantia. Numantia, a hilltop city, became a symbol of defiance, holding out against repeated Roman assaults. The Third Celtiberian War, also known as the Numantine War, 143–133 BC, ended only when Scipio Aemilianus, the conqueror of Carthage, applied the same ruthless methods he had used at the end of the Third Punic War. He cut off Numantia completely, starving it into submission. When the city finally surrendered, the survivors preferred suicide to slavery. The name of Numantia became a byword in Roman culture for stubborn resistance. Yet even after the fall of Numantia, Rome did not have complete control. The mountainous north remained outside Roman domination for another century. It was Julius Caesar, as a young provincial governor in the 60s BC, who campaigned in Hispania Ulterior against local tribes, winning both wealth and political capital. Pompey the Great also fought in Hispania during the Sertorian War, 80–72 BC, when Quintus Sertorius, a renegade Roman general, used native support to hold out against the official Roman regime for years. Sertorius's blending of Roman military discipline with Iberian guerrilla tactics made him nearly unbeatable until his own assassination. The final and most grueling phase of Rome's conquest came under Augustus during the Cantabrian Wars, 29–19 BC. The Cantabrians and Asturers, living in the rugged mountains of the north, fought with extraordinary ferocity. They avoided open battle whenever possible, relying on ambushes and retreating to fortified hilltops. Roman losses were heavy, and Augustus himself travelled to the front to oversee operations. The campaigns involved scorched earth tactics, the destruction of crops and forced resettlement of populations. When the Cantabrians were finally subdued, it marked the end of large-scale resistance, though sporadic unrest continued. The conquest of Hispania was not merely a military affair. It was also an economic and cultural transformation. Roman roads cut through the rugged landscapes, connecting mines, cities and ports. Hispania's rich mineral resources, especially silver, gold and copper, were exploited on an unprecedented scale, fueling Rome's economy. Roman colonies spread Latin language and culture, while veterans settled on confiscated lands. Yet Romanization was uneven. In remote areas, traditional customs survived for centuries. In cities like Tarraco and Emerita Augusta, however, Roman architecture, religion and governance took firm root. The legacy of Rome's brutal conquest was complex. For Rome, Hispania became one of the empire's wealthiest provinces, producing not only minerals, but also olive oil, wine and grain. It also became a recruiting ground for soldiers. Some of the empire's best auxiliary units came from Iberian stock. For the peoples of Hispania, the conquest meant the loss of independence, but also integration into a vast political and economic system. Over time, Hispania would produce emperors such as Trajan, Hadrian and Theodosius, and writers like Seneca and Lucan. Yet the memory of resistance of Viriathus, Numantia and the mountain tribes remained part of the peninsula's identity. The Roman expansion into Hispania was thus not a simple story of conquest, but a long, grinding collision between a centralizing empire and a fiercely independent mosaic of peoples. It was a proving ground for Roman generals, a laboratory for imperial policy, and a crucible of cultural change. The blood, treasure and time invested in Hispania were immense, but the rewards, in Rome's eyes, justified the cost. And though the legions marched away centuries later, their roads, cities and culture left an indelible mark on the land they had fought so hard to